Well, welcome. I decided to do a new series that would be running alongside the Messianic Seal series. I decided to do this because we did the Torah portion, Bereshit, Genesis recently, and some of the things that we discussed sort of brought up in my mind some of the apparent contradictions between chapter 1 and chapter 2. And I have studied the three basic theories, for quite a while. And the one that really caught my eye and seemed to work with a lot of the other aspects regarding Azazel, the scapegoat, the explanation for the demons, and a lot of what we see today in the radical feminist movement. The way that there is a particular name mentioned in the book of Isaiah. All of these things I've been thinking about for a while, so I thought what I would do is just present this material. And I'm not saying that this is something that I necessarily subscribe to 100%. I keep an open mind. But it is a theory that I think the body of believers should be aware of. And if you're going to reject a theory, then you best understand it well enough in order to put the pieces together a different way. I'm using a metaphor for jigsaw puzzle. If certain pieces don't fit in your mind, then you need to find other pieces to fit the missing holes. And so this book, The Case for Lilith, 23 biblical evidences identifying the serpent as Adam's first veiled wife in Genesis. It's written by Mark Wayne Biggs, and he has quite an artist there on his cover. But essentially makes the case that Adam had a wife before Eve that was created in the same order as Adam. And there was a falling out between Adam and Lilith Lilith did not want to submit to Adam, and she ended up becoming a demon. And there's quite a tale. It's somewhat fanciful. So I'm just asking that you look at this material with an open mind and put your notes down there. I think I've got comments open. You should be able to comment. Okay, let's continue on and see what we find. Okay, so these are just the some of the chapters. Okay, lot of interesting stuff here. Leviathan. Let's see here. Lilith in Isaiah 34. Lilith as Aluka, Proverbs 30. There's quite a bit here. A lot about the Nephilim, the pre-flood world. Okay. All right. And also I'm going to be looking up all of these scriptures, and I've got the Hebrew and the Greek, so we can look at the languages and see what we can come up with. So we have introduction. The legend of Lilith is undoubtedly the most fantastic of all ancient rabbinic myths. According to Jewish lore, Lilith was the first wife of Adam. She was created at the same time as the man, but whereas Yahuwah created, I'm using Yahuwah because this author obviously doesn't understand the name, and so it's a title really. But Yahuwah created Adam from the dust of the earth. Lilith was created from filth and sediment. Lilith was a failed mate. She argued constantly with Adam and refused to submit sexually to him from an inferior position below. Eventually, missionary position, I think, is what they're getting at. Eventually, she utterly rebelled against her husband. She unleashed her long hair and shouted the holy, ineffable name of Yahuwah, or God, the name of God. She thereby supernaturally sprouted wings and fled from the garden. According to popular versions of her legend, Yahuwah then sent 3 angels to return Adam's errant woman. They found her in the midst of the Red Sea. However, she refused to return to them. She chose instead to mate with angels, i.e., perhaps fallen angels, and became the mother of demons. Because of her refusal, the angels cursed Lilith that every day 100 of her seed would die. Yahuwah then created Eve as a replacement for the wayward Lilith. Lilith grew angry at Eve for usurping her position. In revenge, Lilith resolved that she would visit Eve's children in childbirth and kill those not protected. According to most versions of her legend, including that espoused by Kabbalah, not that we put in any stock in Kabbalah, mind you, here at Acts 2 Assemblies, but this is just material. Eat the hay and spit out the straw. Lilith returned to the garden under the title of the infamous Serpent. As the serpent, Lilith extracted her ultimate revenge by causing Adam and Eve to fall. Most people acquainted with the Bible would consider Lilith's legend as nothing more than a colorful and fanciful myth with no biblical basis. This is certainly an understandable position, as the legend's versions of early events in the garden appear completely incongruous with the plain written record of Genesis. Yet, if there is such scant evidence of Lilith, why have certain sage scholars throughout the ages pondered and even championed her existence? Michelangelo painted Lilith as the tempting serpent in his famous fresco on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Lilith is likewise depicted as the serpent in a sculpture on the Notre Dame Cathedral in France. Most notably, the rabbis of the Zohar and Talmud taught her existence. These writers were the most learned and sophisticated Jewish scholars over the last 2,000 years. On what basis did these most sage experts adopt ideas that appear in conflict with the plain biblical record? As we shall see, perhaps the plain biblical record is not so plain after all. Okay, one of the things I like about this book is it has some neat art in it. Okay, so here we have Lilith tempting Adam and Eve. Look at that. She's in the, looks like she's kind of a shifter in this picture. Sistine Chapel, Vatican. Interesting. Here we have Lilith tempting Adam and Eve, Notre Dame Cathedral. Apparently, the Catholics consider Lilith as legit, or they wouldn't have put them into their architecture, at least in some respect. There she is, wrapped around a tree. There's Adam and there's Eve. I don't know who these are. Angels, maybe, I don't know. This book shall reveal there are numerous biblical evidences supporting the existence of Lilith as the serpent. More importantly, this book shall show that her legend is not incompatible with Judeo-Christian views on fundamental biblical tenets. Quite the opposite. Her legend illustrates and explains various biblical mysterious mysteries that would otherwise be left unresolved. For example, Lilith nicely explains Yahuwah's foretold rivalry between the serpent and Eve and between their seed. She also explains various inconsistencies in the creation accounts of a man and woman in Genesis. Her story also explains the critical and fascinating role of a female demon named Lilith in Isaiah. This is Lilith's only direct mention by name in the scriptures. In Isaiah, Lilith stands at the crux of Yahuwah's final judgment of mankind on Yom Kippur. Interesting. There she is emblematic of the wicked who shall be damned. In Isaiah, Lilith has a counterpart named Isha. Isha is the first name Adam gave Eve. and it is the name she bore during Yahuwah's judgment of her and the serpent in the garden. It is clear that Isaiah is referring to the rivalry between the serpent and Eve when he discusses the end-time judgment of Lilith and Isaiah, or Isha, rather, Lilith and Isha. Isaiah declares that Isha, Eve, shall not be damned like Lilith on Yom Kippur. Instead, Yahuwah shall redeem her into his promised kingdom. By Isaiah linking Lilith to the great Yom Kippur judgment of mankind, she also becomes linked to the demon Azazel, who plays a strange yet critical role in the Yom Kippur ceremony of Leviticus. In that ceremony, Azazel acts as a rival to Messiah in the scapegoat ritual. This role identifies Azazel as none other than the infamous seed of the serpent, whom Yahuwah foretold would be locked in eternal enmity with Eve's seed, Messiah. Lilith's legend explains Azazel's origins. Many of the clues for Lilith in the Bible are subtle, but once pointed out, they become obvious and convincing. The strongest evidences are revealed only by a careful reading of the literal Hebrew and by a critical examination of the implied facts. This book shall analyze 23 evidences in the Bible that support the existence of Lilith. Incredibly, these evidences support all the essential facets of her legend, such as why she is said to be created from mud and muck and not dust like Adam. These evidences also identify Lilith as the serpent of the garden. In fact, the detailed findings from this book's analysis are so remarkably in harmony with most elements of Lilith's rabbinic legends. I can only conclude that the analytical process used in this book must be much the same means by which the ancient rabbis originally derived details of her legend from the Bible. Some critics may be quite skeptical about accepting Lilith. For them, Genesis speaks plainly of no such woman. However, if Lilith can be identified as the serpent of Eden, even they must admit she plays a very overt and prominent role in the early Bible. The serpent is second in prominence only to Adam in the early chapters of Genesis. This book will present a strong case from biblical evidence that the serpent can be safely identified as Lilith. Other critics might argue that if Lilith's legend was true and she was the serpent, then why does Genesis so tenuously record her creation and her pre-serpent actions? Why does just simply overlooking or misinterpreting a few verses make her seemingly disappear from the account? As this book shall demonstrate, Genesis plainly records Lilith's creation from the dust alongside Adam in the original Hebrew. It cleverly interweaves her creation narrative with Adam's in a poetic doublet. Her creation is even apparent in the imprecise English translation of the King James Version. It is true that Genesis does not directly record Lilith's early personal actions. This period of semi-silence covers the time just after her creation to her return as the serpent. During this period, Genesis does record the ramifications of her actions upon Adam in the garden, but it omits certain references to her. This lack of direct mention is apparently done for mystical reasons. Perhaps Genesis does not wish to stress the acts of this rebellious woman until her actions as the serpent have dire consequences on Adam and his lineage. Another possibility is that the serpent Lilith's legend was so prominent in the ancient world, her actions hardly needed elaboration in Genesis. This book has two main goals. The first is to put forth a complete case for Lilith based solely on biblical evidence. This is sorely needed, as I have yet to find in the public domain a coherent collection of the numerous biblical arguments for her. The only argument proponents usually put forward is outrageously flawed. The faulty argument notes that there are two creation accounts of a woman in Genesis, one in chapter 1 and the other in chapter 2. The argument asserts that none of the creation events described in Genesis 2 is a recap or retelling of the creation events that happened in Genesis 1. Thus, when Genesis 1 speaks of the creation of a man and woman, and Genesis 2 then speaks of the creation of Eve, the two passages must refer to different events. This simplistic argument is based on shamefully faulty logic. If all of Genesis 2 was read as documenting new events not specified in Genesis 1, then Genesis 2:7 would imply there are also two Adams. Let's look at that, Genesis 2:7. Okay, Yahuwah Elohim formed the human out of the soil from the ground, and he blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and the human became a living soul. Furthermore, there would be two whole planets, each with its own ocean and biosphere. We must recognize that parts of Genesis 2 do recap Genesis 1, and that the Lilith argument must be put forth with more care and much more rigor. The second goal of this book is to fathom the implications of Lilith on the messages of the Bible. If she really did exist according to Genesis, then what does her story mean to the overall message of the Bible? As we shall see, her tale solves long-standing biblical mysteries and greatly enriches the Bible's redemptive message without compromising any key traditional Judeo-Christian teachings or understandings. The biblical Lilith. By the conclusion of this book, a remarkably detailed account of Lilith will emerge from strictly biblical evidences. As we shall see, there are textual clues in Genesis that a woman was fashioned from the earth at the same time as Adam. However, whereas Adam's prepared body was animated by Yahuwah's holy breath that filled his nostrils, the woman's body was animated by a defiling mist that erupted from the earth and watered her face. Genesis declares that the woman was destined to become the head of a rival generation to the man's. It calls her lineage the generation of the heavens because its beginnings would lay in her mating with fallen angels. Genesis calls the man's lineage the generations of the earth because its beginnings laid in Adam and Eve taken from his side, which was already complete upon the earth with the man's creation. Genesis declares that after a long struggle, Adam's generations would ultimately flourish and inherit the earth. The woman's generations would ultimately fail. They would fall to the curses rained down in Noah's flood and become demons, disembodied, complaining spirits, rejected from the presence of Yahuwah and doomed to roam the earth until the final judgment. In Yahuwah's infamous judgment of Eve and the serpent in the garden, Yahuwah declares that the serpent Lilith and her seed would be locked in epic battle with Eve and her promised seed. Lilith's seed would bruise the heel of Eve's seed, but Eve's seed would crush Lilith's head. Eve's promised seed was Messiah. Lilith's seed was a rival to Messiah. The Yom Kippur ceremony of Leviticus reveals that this rival was Azazel. It's interesting that the very scapegoat, when the high priest would pronounce the sins of the people, he would pronounce it Azazel, and it would go out into the wilderness and presumably die. Some accounts say they would throw it off a cliff. The ceremony is a foreshadowing of Yahuwah's final judgment of all mankind in the end days. In that ceremony, the high priest casts lots upon two goats. The goat upon whom is cast the lot to Yahuwah is taken to the altar and sacrificed. Its accepted blood offerings bring redemption to the high priest and to all Israel. This goat and high priest are archetypes of the slain and risen Messiah. However, the other goat upon whom is cast the lot to Azazel is the scapegoat. It is a rejected sacrifice sent away into the wilderness to Azazel, bearing all the world's sins. Azazel is the ceremony's counterpart to Messiah. This identifies him as the seed of the serpent Lilith. The link between Azazel and Lilith is confirmed when the Isaiah discusses the end-time judgment of man. The prophet uses the imagery of Yom Kippur, and he places Lilith at the fulcrum of the judgment. Thus, both Lilith and Azazel are linked to the end times judgment of Yom Kippur. A fascinating revelation in Genesis is that Yahuwah judged the serpent and Eve in accordance with the rituals of the bitter water trial specified in Numbers chapter 5. That trial was used for determining the guilt of a wayward wife suspected of adultery. In the trial, a serpent strewed dust into the water in which the holy name of Yahuwah had been blotted. The suspected woman then drank the water, and a supernatural curse of bitterness began in her belly. The priest then took her sacrifice to the altar. Afterward, she drank again of the waters. If the woman was guilty, upon her second drinking, her belly swelled. Her thigh fell away, and she perished. The rabbis called this adulterous wife a sotah. However, if the woman was innocent, she was spared the curses and promised a seed as recompense for the trial. The similarities between Yahuwah's cursing of the serpent, Lilith, and Eve, and the cursing of the sotah trial are unmistakable. Part of Yahuwah's cursing upon the serpent was to eat dust and to go upon her belly. This mirrors the sotah of the trial. She is cursed in her belly that swells from the consumption of dust. In the garden, Yahuwah cursed Eve to give birth in pain, just as the innocent woman of the trial is cursed to bear her promised seed in the pain of the initial bitter waters curses. The epic battle of the serpent Lilith and her seed against Eve and her promised seed are also mirrored in the bitter water trial. As this book shall reveal, the mystical key to the trial is the supernatural insemination of two types of seed. The guilty sotah bears a mystical seed of defilement and idolatry that has rejected sacrifice to Yahuwah. Her swelling belly is a result of this supernatural pregnancy that brings death and curses to the sotah. However, the innocent woman bears a mystical promise seed that is an acceptable sacrifice. It lifts away her curses. As a recompense for her loss, Numbers declares the innocent woman shall receive a second promised seed as a replacement for the first, and she births this physical seed outside of the trial. In the garden parallel to the trial, Lilith was the first sotah, and Eve was the first innocent woman. Eve's promised seed was Messiah. Lilith's seed was Azazel. Azazel is a rejected sacrifice of atonement that brings death and curses, just as revealed in the Yom Kippur ceremony. This book will fully explore the Azazel-Lilith connection. Clues in the first book of Enoch indicate that Azazel was the firstborn seed of Lilith, mating with the fallen angels called Watchers. There is an erroneous age-old assumption by many scholars that Azazel himself was a Watcher. However, a careful analysis of 1st Enoch reveals that the book actually teaches that Azazel was the firstborn seed of the Watchers and not the Watcher himself. The seed of the Watchers mating with women were called Nephilim. They were a race of giants with extraordinary ability that outcompeted ordinary man. 1st Enoch relates that the Nephilim nearly pushed Adam's unpolluted lineage to extinction before the flood. Genesis and 1st Enoch both teach that it was because of the Nephilim that Yahuwah brought Noah's flood. Yahuwah used the flood to restore Adam's pure lineage to prominence upon the earth. As we shall see, certain clues in 1st Enoch and vague ancient legends suggest that Lilith was responsible for enabling the Watchers to mate with the daughters of men. In Lilith's quest to conceive Azazel, she made a deal with the Watchers. She would teach the Watchers how to go unto the daughters of Adam and conceive seed, if their leader Semjaza would agreed first to mate with her and conceive her seed. Therefore, Lilith was responsible for allowing the entire race of Nephilim to come upon the earth, and her actions were the ultimate root cause of Noah's flood. Interesting. The depths of Lilith's legend in the Bible are truly amazing. Realizing she is the serpent does not change the fundamental message of the Bible. However, in recognizing Lilith, a face is put on evil. The serpent has understandable motives, and the epic battle between the serpent and Eve has new understanding. But is Lilith really in Genesis? Read the argument for her case and judge for yourself. A brief history of Lilith. Lilith's legend is ancient. It precedes Judaism by at least 2 millennia. Her legend emerged in tandem with man's first civilization in Mesopotamia. Her legend then followed man's burgeoning civilization in Arabia and the wider Middle East, where each local society cultivated its own variants of her story. For this reason, Lilith's modern legend has many variations across cultures. However, all variations are related and share some core similarities. This book shall focus on the Jewish version of Lilith's legend. Although the Jewish Lilith started with her Mesopotamian roots, the emerging details of her Jewish version were driven and shaped by evidences that the rabbis saw for her in the Bible. Lilith's legend, Jewish legend, has not become stationary or static over time. Her rabbinic legend continues to spread and morph into modern culture. Of all the ancient Jewish legends, Lilith has inspired more modern Western monster mythologies than any other. Her tale was not only the original source material for medieval European beliefs in succubae and night hags, but as the mother of Estries, she also lies as the root of modern vampire lore. I didn't know that. Interesting. Her creation story also fueled ancient Jewish notions about golems and has thus helped inspire the modern Western version of this myth, Frankenstein. The root behind these modern variations of Lilith's legend will be discussed in detail in section 316 and 322. The first written mention of Lilith is found in a Sumerian king list around 2400 BCE or BC. The list states that the father of the great hero Gilgamesh was a Lilu demon. Lilu demons were one of 4 demon types thought to be descended from Lilith. Today, historians categorize all 4 demon types as being in the vampire and succubae class. The first substantial written record of Lilith come in the Sumerian epic Gilgamesh and the Hulapu tree, around 2000 BC. In that tale, the goddess Inanna lovingly tends a Hulapu tree in the holy garden of the gods. She does so in hope of making a throne and a bed made for herself from its wood. However, to her dismay, one day she discovered that she could no longer approach the tree because of 3 frightful creatures that inhabited it. The text says, a serpent who could not be charmed made its nest in the roots of the tree. The Anzu bird set its young in the branches of the tree, and the dark-maid Lilith built her home in the trunk. However, the great Sumerian hero Gilgamesh kills the serpent with his sword. Thereafter, the frightened Lilith tore down her house and fled to the desert, and the Anzu bird flew with his young to the mountains. It is clear from the tale that the maid Lilith, the serpent, and the Anzu bird are intimately linked. I hold that they represent various aspects of a single creature. The serpent represents this creature's physical body. The dark maid Lilith represents its eternal spirit, and the Anzu bird and its young represent the creature's reproductive capabilities and seed. And we shall see this symbolism is harmonious with Jewish teachings on Lilith. The popularity of Lilith's legend in Mesopotamia in the following centuries is documented by numerous archaeological discoveries of Babylonian terracotta reliefs of her, which date from 1500 to 1750 BC. It was during the same era that Israel emerged from Egypt, and Moses wrote the first 5 books of the scriptures, the Torah. Actually, yes, Moses wrote some of it, but the actual commandments Yahuwah wrote with his very finger. It says that in the Torah. Moses apparently taps the same ancient root story of Lilith used in Gilgamesh. He writes of a woman co-created with Adam, but who is animated by the defiling mist from the ground. She becomes the serpent of the garden, who is associated with the tree of knowledge, and who causes Adam and Eve to fall by eating of the tree. The similarities between Moses' Genesis and the Gilgamesh tale are unmistakable. There are at least 7 core similarities. Number 1, in Gilgamesh, Lilith's tale takes place in Inanna's holy garden. This evokes the imagery of the Garden of Eden. The Hupalut tree, number 2, the Hupalut tree of Gilgamesh mirrors the tree of knowledge in Genesis, in which Lilith is said to dwell in some later versions of her myth. The Gilgamesh links Lilith, the spirit, this is number 3, to a great serpent, the body. This mirrors the serpent of Genesis, who is Lilith. Okay, again, these are comparisons between the theory of Lilith being in the first chapter of Genesis and Eve showing up in the second chapter when she's taken from the side of Adam. But the Gilgamesh tale has all these comparisons. You know, it's kind of like Nephilim, when you talk about Nephilim in the book of Enoch, and when you interpret such in Genesis chapter 6. Every culture in the world has tales of creatures coming from heaven, mating with women, and producing these epic, like strong men, people with extraordinary abilities, that kind of thing. Okay, so this is in the Gilgamesh. Okay, number 4, the Anzu bird of Gilgamesh is involved in the act of raising young in the hoopaloo tree. This associates the Lilith of Gilgamesh with the raising of young. The same is true of the biblical Lilith. Her rival seed to Eve is a central feature of the Bible. Gilgamesh associates Lilith, number 5, with the Anzu bird, which flees the garden through flight. This is also an act which the biblical Lilith is said to have done. Number 6, in Gilgamesh, the 3 creatures use the hoopaloo tree to thwart Inanna from attaining her glorious throne and bed of rest. It is likewise so in Genesis. If Eve is equated to Inanna, the physical body of the serpent, is its internal spirit Lilith, and its seed uses the tree of knowledge to thwart Eve in achieving her glorious throne with Yahuwah in a place of rest and peace in heaven. Number 7. Comparison. The Gilgamesh, a great hero, slays the serpent, thereby casting Lilith into the deserts and the Anzu bird into the mountains. This is precisely the scenario in Genesis. Yahuwah declares that Eve's promised seed, the Messiah, would crush the head of the serpent and its seed. Yahuwah declares that Eve's promised seed, the Messiah, would crush the head of the serpent and its seed. The prophet Isaiah expounds further upon this. He relates that in the end times, the slaying of the serpent seed on Yom Kippur would cast the spirit of Lilith into the desert wilderness of Edom. Throughout the Torah, Moses reuses the imagery of the serpent, Lilith, and Eve that he first establishes in Genesis. The cursing of the serpent and Eve becomes the basis for the ceremony of the adulterous wife trial in Numbers 5. It likewise is the basis for the cursing of Israel in the golden calf episode of Exodus. Finally, the curse upon the serpent and its seed is the basis of the symbolism in the Yom Kippur ceremony in Leviticus. That ceremony foretells Yahuwah's final judgment of mankind. Moses was not the only author of the scriptures to mention Lilith's legend. In Proverbs, around 1000 BC, Solomon refers to a female demon named Aluka in a clever riddle. The riddle involves Aluka's ability to curse a womb-bearing seed. Historically, Aluka has closely associated with Lilith, even being assumed to be a direct descendant of her. However, the name Aluka may merely be another title for Lilith. In Isaiah 700 BC, Lilith makes her only appearance by name in the scriptures. There, Lilith plays a critical role in the end times judgment of mankind. According to the prophet Isaiah, Lilith is emblematic of all the damned who shall remain in hell, whereas another woman named Isha, the first name of Eve, represents all the righteous who shall be delivered into the kingdom of Yahuwah. These two references to Lilith will be discussed in detail in sections 321 and 322. The popularity of Lilith continued into the Common Era. She appears in the Testament of Solomon, which was penned anywhere from 200 to 600 AD. This book is doubtlessly apocryphal. However, it serves to illustrate the common Lilith legends of the time. The book portrays Lilith, who goes by the alias Obizeth, as a demon who strangles unprotected children in childbirth. More importantly, Solomon strips away her power, at least in part, by forcibly binding her hair. He then hangs her in front of the temple for all to see and to be an object lesson to the children of Israel. The tale shares interesting facets with the Soda's bitter water trial. It seems apparent that the writer of the Testament was using elements of the trial for his story. In the Soda trial, the hair of the woman was unloosed. The writer of the Testament apparently saw this as the unloosing of the adulterous spirit within her, so that if she were guilty, the demonic Lilith spirit might take hold and work its curses. In Solomon, Lilith was made a spectacle at the temple in plain view for all the public, much like the defiled Soda was made a public spectacle at the temple. Lilith's popularity continued into the 6th century AD. Numerous archaeological digs in Jewish communities of that time were discovered bowls inscribed with magical incantations as protection against her. The purpose of these, it looks like bowls rather, I'm sorry. These bowls was to protect the household's mother and child during pregnancy. The Talmud, 400 to 700 AD, also demonstrates her popularity in this era. The purpose of the Talmud was to preserve rabbinic knowledge in the post-temple era after the scattering of the Jews. There are 5 painfully brief references to Lilith in the Talmud. All are incidental references that pop up during the discussion of other topics. This implies that she was a well-known figure among the rabbis who needed no explanation. The original Talmudic passages describe Lilith as existing at the time of Adam's fall, as siring demon seed from Adam by stealing his semen at night while he slept, as having long hair, as having wings, and as bringing defilement upon women in childbirth. Later rabbis added explanatory footnotes to the original passages. These footnotes described who Lilith was. They did this because with the loss of the temple and the scattering of the Jews, knowledge of Lilith apparently decreased over time. Ironically, it was the purpose of the Talmud to preserve ancient knowledge, yet some of the Talmud's presumed knowledge on Lilith was being lost, and footnotes were later added to clarify her identity. These footnotes describe Lilith as a female night demon, reputed to have wings and a human face. It is clear from the footnotes that the later rabbis were not very familiar with Lilith. All references to Lilith and Talmud and subsequently added footnotes are listed below. Number 1, one may not sleep in a house alone, and whoever sleeps in a house alone is seized by Lilith. Interesting. Number 2, Rabbi Jeremiah ben Eliezer said, during those years after their expulsion from the garden in which Adam, the first man, was separated from Eve, he became the father of ghouls and demons and Lilith. Rabbi Meir said, Adam, the first man, being very pious and finding that he had caused death to come into the world, sat fasting for 130 years and separated himself from his wife for 130 years and wore fig vines for 130 years. His fathering of evil spirits referred to here came as a result of wet dreams. Isn't that something? She grows long hair like Lilith. This is Erubin 100b, footnote, a notorious female night demon. I saw how Horman, the son of Lilith, was running on the parapet of the wall of Mahuzah. Footnote to Horman, a demon, to Lilith, a female night demon. Okay, see, these are references in the Talmud, apparently. To Lilith. Number 5, if abortion had the likeness of Lilith, its mother is unclean by reason of the birth, for it is a child, but it has wings. So it was also taught, or Jose stated, that it once happened at Simone that a woman aborted the likeness of Lilith. When the case came up for decision before the sages, they ruled that it was a child, but that it also had wings. That's probably pretty fanciful there, isn't it? Female demon of the night, reputed to have wings and a human face. The more important work on Lilith outside of the Bible is the Zohar of Kabbalah. In this Jewish mystical work of the 11th century CE, Lilith plays a prominent role. Remarkably, most of the details concerning Lilith derived through the biblical analysis in this book match tenets espoused by the Zohar concerning her. The Zohar explains Lilith's rebellious nature. It states that the defective light of Lucifer animated Lilith, whereas the holy spark of Yahuwah's perfect light animated Adam. According to the Zohar, Lilith later returned to the garden under the title of the Serpent. Okay, so that's where the serpent idea, I suppose, is expounded on in the Zohar. The Zohar also suggests that Azazel is the seed of Lilith. The entirety of chapter 5 is devoted to discussing what the Zohar says about Lilith. Okay, now, Lilith is in the alphabet of Ben Sira. Some people read this book. It's similar to Proverbs, I think. Unfortunately, a discussion on Lilith could not be complete with addressing the alphabet without, I think he means without addressing the alphabet of Ben Sira. The alphabet is an irrelevant rabbinic book anonymously written sometime around the 9th century AD. This farcical book has done much to corrupt the common modern perceptions of Lilith. Well, maybe it did mean that. Maybe it did mean. Unfortunately, a discussion on Lilith could not be complete with addressing the alphabet. Okay, so in other words, he's saying it's not a very good picture. It's corrupted. This farcical book has done much to corrupt the common modern perceptions of Lilith. The problems began when modern readers began to consider the irrelevant alphabet as a serious work. Although it was written in the style of an Agadic Midrash commentary in the Bible, the alphabet was intended to be satirical in nature. It made fun of various biblical characters and rabbinic motifs. It's offered obvious parodies to specific Talmud passages. For example, the book begins with a group of men masturbating in the bathhouse. It then proceeds to talk seriously about farts, urinating donkeys, and the copulation of ravens. Norman Broznik, in his introduction to the Stern and Mirsky edition of the Alphabet of Ben Sira, states, the alphabet may be one of the earliest library parodies in Hebrew literature, a kind of academic burlesque, perhaps even entertainment for rabbinic scholars themselves, that included vulgarities, absurdities, and the irrelevant treatment of acknowledged sancta. Some of this stuff is pretty filthy. Sounds like these rabbis were reading. The belief is substantiated in the alphabet was known to have been read as popular entertainment in most rabbinic communities throughout the Middle Ages. The alphabet includes satirical passages on Lilith, and fortunately, these have become the launching pad for a corrupted modern perception of her. Okay, so maybe this is where people get the idea, even today, that some of the absurdities of the idea of Lilith is based upon all of these tales that were concocted by these rabbis. They have no basis in any kind of hints or scriptural foundation. The alphabet includes satirical passages on Lilith. Unfortunately, these are okay. So the alphabet farcically paints Lilith as a quarreling, headstrong wife, unwilling to submit to her husband. She refuses to lie beneath Adam during sexual intercourse, but demands to lie on top. Eventually, she flees Adam in the garden. The dejected Adam complains to Yahuwah that his wife has left him. Yahuwah thus sends 3 angels to bring the wayward wife back. They fail, rather ineptly, against the headstrong woman. After this, Yahuwah has no option but to make a new wife for Adam. The entire tale has an irrelevant tone, as does the entire book. The rabbi saw Lilith's refusal to lie below as sarcastic entertainment, something purely inconceivable and laughable. Unfortunately, the alphabet's irrelevant image of Lilith has been taken as serious in modern times. Modern feminists quote its passages more than any other source in explaining their version of Lilith. They promote Lilith as the proto-feminist, willing to sacrifice even the paradise of Eden as the necessary cost of freedom and equality. The series of musical concerts called Lilith Fair, founded by Sarah McLachlan in the early 1990s, is perhaps the most brazen example. Some neo-pagan groups have taken up her cause as well, either accepting her dark nature as sacred or finding in her an expression for the erotic goddess within them. So perhaps this book, that's just a compilation of lewd stories, is being used by the modern day feminist movement and to use the icon of sorts of Lilith to come up with their ideas, to throw off the shackles of patriarchy or biblical ordained order, potentially. Okay, so number 3, the biblical case for Lilith. This chapter puts forward Fourth, the biblical argument for identifying the serpent as Lilith. It presents 23 biblical evidences that I have discovered which support her case. Although each evidence considered individually may make an inclusive argument, when they are weighed together as a whole, they form a cogent and hefty case for such a conclusion. The first 10 evidences support the notion that a woman was co-created with Adam before Eve, and that she was a rivalry with Adam. She was in rivalry with Adam. The next 10 support the notion that this first created woman was the serpent of the garden, and that this serpent later came to be called Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. Interesting. The Bible references Leviathan a few times. I remember that. The next two establish that there was a demoness named Lilith in Isaiah, entitled Aluka in Proverbs, who matches all of the critical features of the Lilith legend. Tongue-tied there. Isaiah places Lilith at the crux of the Yom Kippur judgment of the nations. The final evidence establishes that the demon Azazel and the Yom Kippur ceremony of Leviticus was the famous seed of the serpent Lilith. The collected evidences do not support all the facets of the Lilith legend, but they do support most. Many of the few unsupported elements of the legend are easily assumed extrapolations of events that must have taken place. The evidences are briefly outlined below. Each evidence will be covered in more detail in sections dedicated to it in this chapter. Okay, I think I'm going to stop here for the first video. I'll just reread this the next time to sort of get a context a little bit here, and then we'll go through these right here. These are biblical evidences. Of course, the first section was just introductory and had some fanciful stories, you know, the rabbis concocted, even lewd stuff, I guess, referenced in these apocryphal books. You know, look at this stuff with an open mind, especially when we get to the biblical stuff, because there's a lot of Hebrew stuff in here. And I'm going to use a program that shows the Hebrew as well to kind of compare to make sure this guy is, you know, getting the Hebrew correctly. But anyway, please don't get offended at this material. This is not something, this is more of an academic exercise. It is one of the three main theories which try to piece together the Azazel, the name of the scapegoat, which is called Azazel, that the high priest laid his hands upon and sent out in the wilderness, or they threw off a cliff to die, the scapegoat that had all the sins of the people, and to piece together the existence of demons and how they came about, and the Nephilim, and the fallen angels that came down in the book of Enoch on Mount Hermon, and also the explanation of the serpent and who the serpent was. There's three, a lot of these things kind of just come together. And there's three main ways, as I said, of looking at this. This is just one. So look at it with an open mind, and hopefully I'll get more of this material out in time. Okay, well then, until next time, we will see you another time. Shalom, shalom.